The Internet has experienced more than a few updates since 1996, but the same can't be said for Internet regulations. 2021 is the 25th anniversary of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, the last comprehensive update to Internet regulation. Since then, the Internet's evolution has created endless possibilities and new challenges too. Facebook supports updated regulations that set clear guidelines on today's toughest challenges, including protecting people's privacy, fighting misinformation, reforming Section 230, and more. But Facebook isn't waiting for regulation. They're continuing to take action to improve and secure its platforms, building new privacy tools, tripling their security and safety teams, and working with tech peers to enable the safe and secure transfer of data between platforms. See Facebook's progress on key issues and what's next at about.fb.com/regulations.
So a number of books have been released this summer attempting to recap Donald Trump's unpredictable presidency. One of the authors taking on this challenge is Michael Bender, senior White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Bender covered the entirety of the Trump White House and the 2020 campaign. His latest book, called Frankly, We Did Win This Election, the inside story of how Trump lost, was released this July. He joins me now for his untold story. Michael, good to have you with us today.
Hi, Martha. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. You know, I mean, it's a fascinating story any way you slice it. And I think that historians are going to go back and look at this period with a great deal of interest. I think it's unlike any, election and post-presidency that we've ever seen in many ways. So, tell me a little bit, one of the questions that I have, and I've heard a few of the interviews that you've done on this. One of the questions that I have is, do you think that before the election, President Trump thought he was going to win?
Yes, I 100% do. I mean, he had spent not just a year, but 5 years, going back to 2015 and 2016, telling all of us that the only way he could possibly lose an election was by fraud, right? Like, I don't think that he necessarily believed that every step of the way for the last 5 years, but I am convinced that by Election Day, November 3rd of 2020, that there was not a doubt in his mind that he was going to win.
But there were concerns. Don't you think in the camp there were concerns about some of the polls? There were concerns, obviously, about COVID, about whether or not he could pull it off. And he was concerned about Biden, I think early on, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question. I mean, he should not have been that. Obviously, should not have been that. But should not have been that sure of himself. But he had been told. I mean, I detail this in the book. He'd been told that he was going to win Georgia by 4 points. Mm-hmm. I mean, 4 or 5 points, that doesn't sound like a lot, but your listeners will know, that's a comfortable margin. And obviously he lost. He was told he was going to win Arizona. The campaign's numbers were off. So were a lot of other people's, to be fair. And he had surrounded himself with a lot of people who were kind of trying to one-up each other to win his praise and to get his attention. I mean, I have in the book here that Robert O'Brien, the national security advisor, was telling Trump about something he saw on the internet that showed he was approaching 400 electoral votes. I mean, that's that would be a historic margin. And how the sort of the campaign folks around him who heard that were just beating their heads on the wall of why you would not Trump but any candidate, why you would just kind of let them know about random sort of projections from the internet. So yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the story too. Is at the end of the day, Trump wasn't particularly well served by some of the people around him for a number of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it was also just such a crazy time. You had COVID, and I remember wondering about the polls at that point. I mean, who's answering these polls in the middle of everything that's going on? But as you point out in the book, when they saw the numbers come in, they had more votes than they did in 2016, and they had when you look at the demographic groups, they had lost suburban voters, but they had won more Black voters, more Hispanic voters. Those numbers went up pretty significantly. So do you think? I mean, obviously, I would imagine that's part of what was so hard for him to digest was that he had more votes and lost the election.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. I mean, we all know he ended up around with 75 million votes, which was, about 15% more than what his own campaign was projecting on election day. I mean, by election day, right? I mean, this is a $2 billion campaign operation, effectively, between them and the RNC. And, there's the best people that money can buy at that point, and they are telling him that it's going to be a low turnout and miss the number by 15%. So that's got to be disorienting for him. But, Trump is an energizer, right? I mean, he energizes his own people as much as he does his opponents. And, even as hard as it may have been, it was for everyone to sort of understand how Trump got 75 million votes and lost. I mean, you can't sort of be confused by that and then also not by, right? I mean, Biden got 80 million votes, right? So, it's not like that was also, an unexpected turnout on their side.
Enormous turnout across the board. Then you talk about the period after the election and sort of the debate that went on between family members, as you report, and some of the staffers, Hope Hicks among them, about how to spend the rest of the presidency, because then it sort of immediately becomes about the legacy. And as I remember saying after the election, any one-term presidency is like a presidency interrupted. It's an incomplete presidency as Americans look at these across the board. So then you talk about the decisions that were being made about how to spend that time to build that legacy. And, I think we know what the decision was, but tell me a little bit about that debate.
Yeah, I mean, there's a debate inside Trump world at sort of from every corner, the campaign, the RNC, inside the White House, across the administration, and not just how to spend the next 2 months, but how to try to describe that to the president, right? And that's the scene I have in the book here, is at campaign headquarters, the family, senior aides, the inner core of Trump world, not just trying to figure out how to spend those last couple of months. But what happens is that Trump's oldest son say, no, Hope, we're not going to, go out and take a bow, because, they channel their father in that moment, right? They know what his reaction is going to be, and that he'll never go for this, right? Like they say, it's a non-starter. So what ends up happening, right, is that the campaign manager and the campaign's top attorney go to Trump and tell him not that he's lost. Right on November 7th, when the election had been called, there's a meeting in the White House that afternoon. They don't tell Trump that he's lost, but that he still has a chance to win, right? And technically, the votes hadn't been certified and all that, and there's legal challenges, sure, but he's lost, right? I mean, that was there's a lot of experts that were these are not calls that get made lightly. Livelihoods are on the line if those are made incorrectly. But they go in to tell Trump that he's still got a 5 to 10% chance to effectively overturn Wisconsin, overturn Arizona, and win a recount in Georgia. I mean, Martha, there's not a 5 to 10% chance of that happening in any single one state, let alone hitting the jackpot on all three, right? So. And I'm not trying to pin the blame on any of those people for what happens in January 6th, but no one. This is what I mean about Trump not being well served. There's very few people around Trump in this last year in office who are willing to just point blank tell him, what the reality on the ground is.
Was anybody arguing that, according to your reporting, that it was over at that point, or was there, because I think about the sort of counterpuncher mentality, right? And the whole course of his career in real estate in New York and then in television and all of it, that you never stop fighting, right? That there's always a way, that there's always a way to, to sort of go through the legal system or figure it out. And I think that the culture is so built around that it must have been very difficult for anyone at that point to not argue that a fight was okay, that a fight was what to do.
Oh, 100%. I agree with that 100%. I mean, not just right, Trump, who'd been telling all of us that that no other politicians. I mean, he spent his 4 years in the White House. So no other politicians were to be believed that the courts were wrong, that he was always going to be acquitted. He would never fade away. I mean, this is the reality that he'd imposed on, and to say nothing of the fact that
which he was twice in those instances.
True. And, it's hard to do with any president, right? Like the people around Barack Obama, the people around George W. Bush. I mean, it was not easy to tell them when, the president that they're wrong or that, they're about to make a wrong decision. I mean, you're in this, in the orbit, in the gravitational pull of the most powerful political office in the world. It's not an easy thing to do.
Absolutely.
But particularly so with Trump. And so there was a little bit, right? I mean, there are, like, you mentioned Hope Hicks. Hope Hicks does, float this. She has some support in the room from, a couple of other senior aides. Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, they knew the direction this was going. Ronna McDaniel, the chairwoman of the RNC, Mike Pence, the vice president. But what happens here is that Trump isn't, when they see Trump, when they talk to Trump in those first couple of weeks in November, he's not screaming at them about the results. He's not, he's not yelling. He's not, as he is prone to do on occasion. So they tell themselves and tell each other that, well, he's actually in a good state of mind here, that he can find his way to conceding, and that he just needs a little bit of space. But Marshall, what ends up happening here, giving him that space only created an opening for the Rudy Giulianis, the Sidney Powells to, get their foot in the door at the Oval Office and to tell Trump what he wanted to hear, which was, you can keep fighting. This isn't over yet, and it's a conspiracy against you. Again, we see what the results of that are at the end of the day, and so I think that this book, in a lot of ways, is a tragedy. For Trump, for the people around him, for his followers, for his supporters who go to rally, and I'm in bed with them for a couple of years to get to know them and their reasons for following this, being part of this movement. I just kind of keep coming back to at the end of the day, it's the buck stops with Trump, right? I mean, it stops with the president, stops with the candidate, and I think that's kind of where I end up on this book.
Yeah, it's interesting, just sort of tracking, and these are all documented moments during this period when certain people start kind of falling away from the core, and
right.
You go through the exit of William Barr, who I think is one of the really fascinating characters in this story. And I think he and the president were on the same page for a long time because the attorney general, felt strongly about the things that he felt very strongly about, that what happened in the intelligence agencies with regard to Russian collusion was wrong and unmerited. And that's something that he felt, from a legal perspective, was a wrong that he wanted to see righted. And, he got a lot of press that sort of presented him in a way that that may have been unfair based on who he is as a person and what his principles are. But in the end, there was a breaking point for him as well in December.
Yeah, totally, 100%. I mean, Pat Cipollone, the chief White House counsel, Mark Meadows, the White House chief of staff, they have to talk Barr out of quitting. When he had reached his breaking point over the election fraud, there's this blow-up meeting in the just outside the Oval Office in Trump's kind of private dining room outside the Oval Office, and Barr's kind of had his fill of being insulted by Trump, of having his agency insulted, the Justice Department insulted over claims of election fraud, and effectively quit. And I have this scene in the book where he storms out of the White House, and his black sedan is pulling out of the parking lot when Pat Cipollone literally chases it down, slapping on the back of the window to get it to stop, and gets into the car and pleads with him. Right? I mean, Pat Cipollone, Mark Meadows. I mean, Barr is viewed as one of the heavy hitters in the administration, one of the voices of reason, and kind of like one of the old wise bulls of the Trump cabinet at that point, and pleads with him to just, take a breath and think about it overnight. And Barr decides to stay, immediately regrets it, and then ends up resigning 2 weeks later.
Mm-hmm. So, I guess there's a lot, obviously, that we know about January 6th from watching it play out minute by minute. I think one of the things that we don't have as strong a handle on is what the president, what he expected that day and what he thought was going to happen. And then the fact that he had to sort of deal with it in real time in terms of perhaps not wanting to alienate the people who he felt were there just for the right reason and that they were, protesting and expressing their own dislike. And then, sort of all hell breaks loose. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think there's still a lot that we don't know about where Trump's head was and what Trump's actions were, not just in the days leading up to January 6th, but on January 6th itself. I think I still start to fill in some of the gaps here. I mean, I do have a scene here on the evening of January 5th where he and Pence had their kind of final, go-round over whether or not Pence could, not certify the election results on the 6th. And, it's described to me as a pretty heated meeting, but almost moments after that, Trump is in the Oval Office and calls in some other aides. You remember the January 6th rally was just across the South Lawn from the Oval Office on the ellipse. So Trump could hear his supporters already out there the night before, listening to the kind of classic rock music that he would play before rallies and hooting and hollering and, cheering. And he calls aides into the Oval Office. And again, it's January. He has the door open. There's this, freezing breeze blowing through the Oval Office. And he wants his staff to sit there and listen with him to all of the energy out there. And he's signing bills on his desk and kind of,
and meanwhile, the Georgia election is underway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, by the way.
And he kind of asks a sort of a, sort of chilling foreshadowing of what's coming. Like he asks his aides around him if they think that the next day is going to be a peaceful one. And the aides around him say yes. And, for good reason, right? I mean, there's always been Trump's rallies are by and large peaceful events. I mean, there are moments of violence, and there have been over 600 ticketed events that Trump has had for his campaign. I mean, there have been some pretty notable exceptions, but
there always are, though. I mean, when you get people together in those kind of numbers, to be fair.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, there's no guarantee of violence. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, right? And as they tell me, unless your rally goers, cross paths with some of the counter protesters in town, which shouldn't happen because of the way things are set up, it should be a peaceful day tomorrow. And everyone kind of nods at that, except for Trump. In terms of, well, I don't know. You got to remember, my people are pretty fired up, which no one really kind of thought about it in the moment. But afterward, when I was, interviewing people for the book, that was something that several people in the room remembered, had recalled with, pretty vividly after the events that unfolded the next day.
Yeah.
The Untold Story continues right after this.
The Internet has experienced more than a few updates since 1996, but the same can't be said for Internet regulations. 2021 is the 25th anniversary of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, the last comprehensive update to Internet regulation. Since then, the Internet's evolution has created endless possibilities and new challenges, too. Facebook supports updated regulations that set clear guidelines on today's toughest challenges, including protecting people's privacy, fighting misinformation, reforming Section 230, and more. But Facebook isn't waiting for regulation. They're continuing to take action to improve and secure its platforms, building new privacy tools, tripling their security and safety teams, and working with tech peers to enable the safe and secure transfer of data between platforms. See Facebook's progress on key issues and what's next at about.fb.com/regulations.
I want, in the time that we have left, I want to sort of spin forward and ask you, do you think that he plans to run in 2024?
Oh boy, I don't know. I mean, we know he likes to be part of the headlines, right? Good or bad, which is a big part of the reason why I think he talked to so many authors of the books that are coming out. I think that from what I can tell, from my reporting, the people around him have been urging him to keep his powder dry until 2022. There's a lot that is going to be, made a little bit more clear from the 2022 election results. I mean, this is an opportunity for the Republican Party's at a crossroads here, right? And they can kind of choose whether or not they want to redefine themselves post-Trump and what that looks like. And I don't know. He's going to want that information before he makes a decision, and I don't know what that decision is going to be. But what I do know is that this book details in a lot of new and different ways, what Republicans should be thinking about when they go into that decision. This book, I think, shows in a new light how Trump as a president, as a candidate, and as a leader of a movement.
I mean, I think obviously one of the big factors is going to be that he still has a tremendous amount of support. And can any Republican win without those people and without the real support of those people?
Agreed. Oh, totally agree. And we'll see what this support looks like. I mean, I think the thing that makes this book unique out of the pantheon of Trump books that have been written for decades is I do spend a lot of time getting to know the people who go to these rallies. I wait out, I camp out with them before rallies. They stand in line with them. Shared meals with them, traveled with them. To understand what it was, why they kept going back to see, effectively the same show over and over and over again. And,
and what's your answer to that? Why did they?
Well, that in a weird in a surprising way, that Trump made their world bigger. I mean, I say surprising because, Trump isn't, Trump has, it kind of keeps his world very small. He spends he goes back to his own bed every night, right? He doesn't really like to travel. He eats at the same places. He keeps his circle of friends very tight, always has. But for what his movement did was for a lot of people who were, but a lot of the people I met were, maybe estranged from their families, never had kids, retired with a lot of time on their hands now. And what the movement did was introduce them to a lot of not like-minded people, but people similar to them, right? Who they traveled together, they shared hotel rooms, stayed at each other's houses, made plans together, joined Facebook groups together, and suddenly we're traveling more in 2020 than they ever had in their lives, while the rest of us were locked down in our own houses. So I really did enjoy giving a chance to tell their story. But I do think it's even more pressing now, post January 6th, to understand why, why after what happened at the Capitol, Trump can still draw thousands to the rally like he did last month in Ohio, or thousands to the rally like he did this month in Florida. And, by all accounts, I mean, that's, something that will, he remains a very powerful draw in Republican politics.
Yeah, certainly, and it remains to be seen, what that power looks like in terms of endorsement and support in 2022. He's been, out front with the candidate that he's supporting against Lisa Murkowski, Kelly Tshibaka, and there's also the question about whether or not, and maybe a Trump family member sort of takes over the actual running for office part of this story. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that before I let you go?
Well, I know that he really, really wanted Laura Trump, his daughter-in-law, Eric's wife, to run for Senate in North Carolina. I mean, badgered her, right? I mean, I say that in a daring way. I mean, just repeatedly tried to get her to run for that seat, but she didn't want to. I don't know what, if any of the Trump family members will pick up the mantle, but you're definitely right about he's made 24 endorsements so far, all the way from, Senate, U.S. Senate down to there's a Staten Island borough president race that he's endorsed in. And
I mean, some of that is just anger about people who didn't, who weren't supportive, right?
Well,
I mean, that's a motivator for a lot of those early picks.
Yeah, the Alaska one you mentioned. I mean, there's a handful of primary challengers against Republican incumbents, which is exactly what you said, is anger over the impeachment votes. But still, those are not easy races to win, even for a popular former president, right? So if he, depending on how those turn out, I mean, that's going to be informative for not just him, but, the Ron DeSantis's of the world, the Ted Cruz's of the world, the Tom Cottons of the world, who are wondering what they're going to do in 2024, too.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see who answers, whether it's President Trump or someone else who answers the call of the people who support him. And I don't, I think it's interesting the way that you characterize people who go to the rallies. I'm not sure that that's, reflects a lot of other people who were supporters of the policies. Who,
I agree.
Have families and, get out of the house and all of that good stuff. But, and
I totally agree.
So is someone else, whether or not there's someone else who will answer that call and can, sort of group in all of those people from who were supporters in the past or whether that, whether he will run again, which, my gut tells me he will at the moment. Because he tends to like to do what he thinks people don't think he's going to do. so that's one reason, at least at this point, which is early on. But did it bother you that he wasn't happy with the outcome? I know you spent a lot of time with him. Went to Mar-a-Lago. He was open with his time with you, and he wasn't. No,
I mean it didn't bother me. So I guess I've interviewed him a bunch of times. I worked for the Wall Street Journal. He likes the Wall Street Journal, right? I mean, he respected my reporting most of the time. But I interviewed him in Trump Tower, in Air Force One, several times in the Oval Office. So we knew each other pretty well. I will say, for me, the sort of crux, the linchpin of our relationship has always been my hair. I kind of have a little bit longer, sort of wavy. Auburn hair, and he always compliments it every single time, and to the point where I just get ribbed mercilessly from my other White House press corps colleagues. But I also take it as a significant compliment from someone like Trump, who takes so much pride
hair
in
is
his own
important. Hair is important.
Yeah. So had he attacked my disparaged my hairdo, I would have known something was really wrong.
So you feel like there's
Martha, Yeah, I mean, I say that in jest, but the President Trump and I have talked about this book for a very long time. He knows I've talked to a lot of people. He knows who's talking to me, and people who don't normally talk to journalists were talking to me for this book. And I think that's what he's concerned about more than any particular, or was concerned, than any particular.
Do you think you were fair to him?
Yeah, I mean, I think if he read this book, yes, I do. I think I was exceedingly fair to him, not just by all the normal kind of journalistic kind of crutches of I asked you to respond and you didn't, or
right.
That kind of stuff. I mean, I did all those things, right? I made sure he and his team knew all the details, but I go to great lengths here to explain where to talk about my exposure to Trump, where what I learned about him, and to draw, go back and look at his 2000, when he was flirting with the race in 2000 and 2012, and where this candidacy came from, and to show the human side of Trump. I mean, there's a scene here I have in here of Trump telling someone how much he admires Mike Pence's kind of quaint monogamy, right? Which is a kind of a very human and endearing moment for Trump that the cable networks are not going to turn into a headline, but there's a lot in this book, I think, for and I think he would appreciate if he read it. So
thank you, Michael. It's great to talk to you. It's a really interesting story, and there's just a lot here, a lot of political history and a lot of interaction between human beings that's very revealing. So thanks for coming in.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan, Martha.
Thank you, Michael. Good to have you.
You've been listening to The Untold Story. I'm Martha McCallum. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Make sure to rate and review. For more podcasts, go to foxnewspodcasts.com.
Hi, everybody. It's Brian Kilmeade. I want you to join me weekdays at 9 a.m. East as we break down the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest newsmakers and, of course, what you think.
Listen live or get the podcast now at BrianKilmeadeShow.com.